What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some gameplay and other details about Mortal Shell 2. Though right off the bat, sorry if I sound a little bit odd, the springtime pollen everywhere is really messing with my allergies, but let's go ahead and keep it moving. Now, Mortal Shell 2, if you are not aware, is an upcoming Souls-like, I would say, though a couple of caveats to that is due out sometime in 2026. This game was put on my radar when it was initially announced, mainly because a lot of people have asked me previously to check out the original Mortal Shell, which did some interesting stuff with its shell system, I guess you could call it, and that combined with how interesting this already looks on its own, and it was always something I was going to keep up with. And so a couple of days ago, when they dropped an updated gameplay reveal, I was obviously keen to check that out, and that is a lot of what we are doing here. Probably worth a mention then that I have obviously not played the original game, but the good news is neither I or you really need to have done that, because this is meant to be a standalone sequel that is not dependent on knowledge of the original game. In fact, the relatively simple story description seems to reinforce that, with the Steam page describing it as us playing a character known as the Harbinger, a prophesized being meant to reclaim what they are calling the stolen ova, which I think is meant to be some sort of like egg unborn thing type situation. And naturally, we're going to have to fight our way through hordes upon hordes of minions in order to do that. Which brings us, of course, to the more gameplay-oriented details. Now, one thing that struck me straight away is that what they've shown off here and what the game is described as is a compact open world, or an interconnected world, where you can, for the most part, freely explore and go as far as your skills are able to take you. Now, they described this as being compact, and yet apparently there are also 60 dungeons packed into this place, so I don't know how compact it actually is, but it will be what you could consider something akin to an open world, as opposed to, a potential level structure, etc. Along the way, in our explorations there, we will run into NPCs and the like who will have quests for us. One they show off in the gameplay reveal asks you to find his lost cat, which, at least from the reveal here, seems to actually be a cat. So there's that at least. In order to get around more quickly, you're going to utilize the game's beacon fast travel system, which is as straightforward as it sounds. Defeating bosses or just finding them and the like will activate beacons, which can then be used to teleport you to what appears to be a sort of home hub area, or just simply allow you to fast travel or potentially even level up. Though speaking of leveling up, that is one area of this gameplay reveal that I am very curious about how exactly progression is going to work. Now, at one point we do see the person playing swapping between the shells, which are the mechanic we're about to talk about, but also their weapons and the like, which was interesting because one of the main mechanics of a game like Mortal Shell is that your Harbinger character is more of a spirit possessing shells, as they are called. Shells are essentially skins of builds and play types, different characters you can take on the role of. However, some of their weapons and things are customizable based on what you have found and unlocked, and apparently each shell has its own strengths and abilities as well, which we see on display in the gameplay reveal, of course. Now, what's interesting to me about this system, or at least the most interesting I would say, is how progression works on a more high level, let's say. Are we leveling up individual shells? Are we leveling up base stats that then apply across these shells? Is it purely more of like a weapon thing? How does all that work? That's one of the main things I walked away from this gameplay reveal still wondering. And yet, there are still a few more things to go over here. So one thing I also noticed pretty quickly is that there does not appear to be a stamina bar so much as an ability bar, I guess you could call it. I noticed that as these characters are fighting various enemies, they fill up this orange bar above their health. It appears to me that that bar is some sort of resource that is then being used to activate the abilities that are unique to the shell that you are actually using, which seems to be a sort of stamina replacement system, which should, in theory, give you full access to your movement abilities and not have to worry about stamina as a resource to be conserved, let's say. Now, another mechanic they showed off seems to be something akin to like a posture system. As you are hitting enemies, you are filling a sort of stun bar below their health, and when that got maxed out, it appeared to stun the enemies that were being fought. But beyond that stuff, it's a lot of mechanics that you've come to expect from these types of games. We see them pick up something called an infusion and then use that to power up their weapons with elemental attacks. we see stuff like backstabs and parries, which all look, appropriate for what the kind of experience they're building here is ultimately going to be, with a modification, of course, being around, what shell you're actually using in the moment. Though speaking of those shells, they do show off one boss fight as part of this reveal, where you briefly die and your shell gets tossed to the side. Now, I was curious how this would play out, but what it looks like is once you get thrown back into your regular Harbinger form, if you are able to do either enough damage or maybe even potentially stun and attack this, it looks like your shell recharges and you are able to reuse it, as opposed to just dying outright. Now that's especially noteworthy because it looks like, if I had to guess, you are not dead until both the shell you are actively using and then your base Harbinger form die, though presumably being thrown out of the shell would deprive you of its unique benefits and abilities and things that you would otherwise have access to, so it's definitely not something you necessarily want to happen, unless of course they give you abilities to build around it, I suppose, but as it stands we are not privy to that information. And so those are some of the more interesting gameplay details around this. But I will say, on more of just like a technical and vibe level, it does look pretty interesting. I'm curious about how they managed to build this interconnected world and how the level design ultimately pans out there, if those are interesting to find and explore. I think interconnected worlds provide the opportunity to potentially have just like really compelling level design, which we don't always see these days. And as mentioned, I am very interested in seeing what they do with the ultimate like progression setup. Is progression just down to like shells and the equipment they are using? Is there more stat-based progression around things like your health and damage, etc.? But even beyond those things, it looks like a game that I will enjoy the sort of darker, grittier atmosphere that they seem to be going for here. But obviously time will tell. Now, as for today, I would imagine that will pretty much just about do it. For the most part, I will say, again, looking forward to this one. It looks pretty good from this little preview. I still have a few questions, mind you, but I would say most of those answers will be things I will get from just playing the game for myself, as opposed to potentially any other media coverage. Either way, this game is supposed to be releasing in 2026. I think it's not impossible we would get a release date around the beginning of June when they start doing those trade shows. So hopefully we won't have too much longer to wait. But again, as for today, that is pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.